our intrepid host. He's going to, there we go. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining in. I know we're kind of betwixt and between. Hope everybody survived the fast and all your tefillot were answered.
Stuart, you have to unmute. Stuart, you have to unmute.
So hopefully you can hear me now. Just let me switch something off here. All right, so again, welcome, and reminder that we will not meet next week because it's Chol Hamoed Sukkot. So you'll have a week off, and we will come back, God willing, 2 weeks from today, but it will be at 5 o'clock. We have to go a little bit earlier. At some point, we'll switch to a later time, but I think we can watch your WhatsApp that I sent you, but 5 o'clock should be the time 2 weeks from now, if our host Yossi agrees. But if not, we'll try to inform you either way. Okay, so we're going to talk about two things. First of all, we're going to talk about, we'll intertwine them. We're going to talk about Hazinu, which this week's Parsha, which is in song form. When you look at Hazinu, perhaps in your Chumash, but certainly in the Torah, you see that it's 2 columns and it's written differently than the other Parshiot in the Torah. And it was introduced previously that God tells Moshe to put this song in the ears of the Jewish people. And it actually, there are those who hold that, it's a minority opinion, that Hazinu is a mitzvah d'oraita. It's a biblical mitzvah to read it because it's basically Moshe saying that, God saying to Moshe, make sure that people sing this song, and Moshe transmits it to us. I remember when I was in yeshiva, it was cut, and even before that, in grammar school, we had to learn this Sedra by heart, Hazinu. It's not long at all, it's quite short, but at the same time, it has very, very difficult words because it's very poetic, like a song. It only has 52 psukim, and it has some beautiful prose or poetry in it. However, it's not what you would think of as a song. When we think of a song in the Torah, of course, we're thinking of the Shira, the ultimate song, the song at the sea, Az Yashir Moshe. Then there are a couple of other songs included in the Torah. This would not, I guess you could call it a song, but it's not all peaches and cream, because the first part and the majority of this parsha is God giving us a very serious tongue lashing, musar, about how we have strayed. Now, you know, this is Moshe's last day of his life, and that's another thing to talk about, why he's not quite ending yet. We have a Zot HaBracha. We will end on a positive note, but yet there's a lot of, as we'd say, musar, rebuke coming in this parsha, and a lot of name calling. God says about us that Am Naval V'lo Chacham, we are a nation of scoundrels and not very smart, because we have rejected the mitzvot. Moshe looking into the future at the times that we will stray from keeping the Torah, and a lot of negative things that will happen to us. One of the interesting prophecies, or you can call it that, a very famous phrase, Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivat, that Yeshurun, which is another name for the Jewish people, Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. Basically, the rabbi saying this means that when we got wealthy, we essentially kicked off the our adherence to the Torah and mitzvot, which is what happens sometimes when people get wealthy. They think, well, I don't really need God. Shamanta avita kasita. You got fat. You got thick. This is not describing anyone in particular, so don't take it personally. And Vayitosh Eloha Asahu, and you deserted the God that created you. And there are just a lot of things in here that are very, very negative. So it's not what you would think of as a song, which usually is done in praise of the Jewish people. However, we do come to the end of this parsha, and we get some good news. And Hashem says, it's true that because of your not keeping the mitzvot, you had to deal with enemies who, Echai Yerdof Echad Elef, and one could pursue 1,000. This is almost a kind of prediction of the Shoah. We have another phrase here that's often used in connection to the Holocaust. Vayomer astira panai mehem. God says, I will turn my face away from you, and ereh macharitam, and I'll see what will happen to you. So this is often used, this idea of hester panim, of God turning away from us, and then all of these unfortunate things occur. However, it is a mixed bag, because when we get to the end, there already Hashem says, there will come a time that you've suffered enough. V'chiper ad mato amo, and God is going to forgive the land and the people. And harninu goyim amo, and the other nations, excuse me, will actually sing the praises of the Jewish people. So you see a very kind of sharp turn in the language and in the text of this short parsha. It goes from criticizing us, from castigating us, to God saying, don't worry, ultimately, I will be with you. And I would just mention one other very fascinating phrase, to quote one of my close friends, Rabbi Natan Lopez Cardoza. The pasuk says, Heim kinuni below el. They provoked me with a non-God. In other words, that the Jewish people worshipped other gods instead of me, the real God. And what is the result of that? Vani akniem below am. I will avenge myself on them through a non-nation, a lo am. Now, what is a non-nation? It's a group of people that call themselves a nation, basically try to hoodwink the world into thinking they're a nation, but they're not a nation. Does that sound like anybody you know, such as the Palestinians, who pretend to be a nation? They have no history. They have no, as we've seen before, right? The history book of the Palestinian are all blank pages, and they have just fabricated their history as if they have one, sometimes claiming to be from the Canaanites and all kinds of other fiction. So this actually very apropos to this pasuk. In any case, and I'm talking fast because we're on time limit, and so I have to listen fast. But in the end, God will not desert us. It is a mixed bag, and it is very emblematic of Jewish history and Jewish life that we go really to the extremes. And we've seen this to some, really, maybe not with our own eyes personally, but we know about it certainly. We've seen this in the real turnaround from the Shoah, which perhaps the lowest point of Jewish history ever, when many people thought Judaism can never come back, can never regenerate. And then not too long after, Hakamat HaMedina, we go to the other end of the other extreme, where we come back to our own country, which is unprecedented in history, and we create this fantastic land, and we make the desert bloom. We do all kinds of wonderful, great things, and we go from one extreme to the other. And there is this dichotomy of the Jewish people, that we unfortunately have to suffer the lowest lows, but we also experience the highest highs. And that is just the facts. That's just our history. And we see this kind of up and down movement all throughout, from the very moment that we become a Jewish nation. We see it reflected in Abraham and Sarah, who experience very low lows with suffering without a child, and then they receive a child. We see it with Yaakov, who seemingly loses Yosef, and then is reunited with him after suffering emotionally for 22 years, etc. And this is much of what this song of Hazinu is trying to encapsulate. And as I say, it's very poetic. It's worthwhile looking through it, even if you don't memorize it, which takes us to the idea of Sukkot. Sukkot has also this dual personality. Chazal say, on the one hand, we've come out of Yom Kippur. If we didn't receive a positive marks from God over the course of Aseret Yimei Teshuvah, then going into a sukkah is meant to approximate the idea of going into exile. Because one of the great punishments, one of the worst punishments for the Jewish people is exile, right? We say it on the Chagim, Mipnei Chateinu Galinu Me'artzenu, because we sinned, we had to be exiled from our land. It's ironic that there are people, as we know, who will live in the Galut and think it's paradise. So that's really a case for kind of a gigantic psychiatrist couch to go on, to think that when you're in exile, you're really living the good life, because the Torah tells us exactly the opposite. So the sukkah can represent a kind of mini exile, because you're going to a place where you don't have all your creature comforts around. Its space is limited, and you're exposed to some extent to the elements. On the other hand, we're told that if you look at things differently, then the sukkah is quite the opposite. It's not a punishment. It's an opportunity to be in an intimate space with you and God, to be able to have a mitzvah that surrounds you, right? This is one of the 3 mitzvot that can surround a person. You can be surrounded by your talit, you can be surrounded by your sukkah, and you can be in Eretz Yisrael, and you're surrounded by the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So when you're wrapped in your talit in your sukkah in Israel, you're really enveloped by the mitzvot in a 3-fold fashion. So the sukkah is something which has that kind of dual personality. You can look at it as being a punishment, or a way of another form of tshuva, or you can look at it as being something very unique and special, where you are alone in that intimate space with God. And you can look at the different elements of the sukkah, which are also have that same kind of duality. The land, the sukkah is made up of 3 parts. One is, it's the land. Yeah, I'm sorry, you're right, Marsha, the mikvah also. Yes, thank you. Thank you. For a man, it's never a mitzvah unless they're converting to go to the mikvah. So the woman can replace the talit with the mikvah. And I'm not going to go any further than that. So you can say male and female will have 3 things that surround you that are a mitzvah. So, but thank you for that, Marsha. So you have the land. Obviously, a sukkah is outside on the earth. And that is something which is that eternal. That's why Hashem calls heaven and earth. So that is real. That's why we call it real estate. So Eretz Yisrael, it can never be replaced. It can never vanish. It's there. You can't dislodge it. Whether hopefully we're there, but even when we're not there, it doesn't go away. And then you have the walls of the sukkah, and those are very fragile. So the earth is steady and constant, but the walls of the sukkah, which can move in the wind and which generally are not of any kind of permanent state and are of a temporary nature, that's an idea also that our existence is tenuous, that we're constantly in danger. And like the moon that waxes and wanes, we sometimes come to a low ebb, and we are in danger of collapsing like the walls of a sukkah. And of course, the most important part of the sukkah is the schach, that which is above us. And that teaches us that if we do what we're supposed to do and we trust in Hashem, that even in a flimsy and temporary housing, we will survive. And indeed, we have managed to survive throughout all the generations. And the sukkah, therefore, is very much like Israel. We value the land. The land is precious. We build these walls. Some people compare the walls to the borders of Israel. They can be threatening. And we know that some of our neighbors are peaceful, semi-peaceful at least, and others are not. And therefore, we're always looking to the different directions and to see whether the walls stay sturdy. It's interesting, I will just mention too, in this kind of duality, we're 50 years after the Yom Kippur War. And I think it's, without spending too much time on it, just to point out that the Yom Kippur War is also the same kind of idea, because on the one hand, it was a very tragic occasion. And we know about the thousands of soldiers, men and women, who were killed or injured. And in that sense, it was a very sad time and a tragic time. On the other hand, military people will tell you that the end of the Yom Kippur War, the victory at the end of the Yom Kippur War, was the most miraculous of any of the wars that we fought, more so even than the 6-Day War, because we really were on the verge, God forbid, of being overrun, and the country, we can't predict, but perhaps the country just falling to the enemy, and never more so than during the Yom Kippur War. So the miraculous victory that we achieved when we're in such a low place is exactly this kind of mixture of the tragic and the miraculous, the negative and the positive, the sad and the happy. I want to tell you a story. We are approaching the 20th yahrzeit of our son, Ari Yoshua, Hashem Yikom Damo, which is the 24th of Tishrei, the 19th of October. So coming up very, very soon. And I want to just tell you a story, not so much about Ari, but about this idea of the mixture of these elements of sadness and happiness. We try, ever since Ari was killed, we try to, whenever possible, go, and some of you may have heard this story, and I actually spoke about it on Rosh Hashanah at Ohel Ari, but so I apologize if you've heard it, but it's, I think, a powerful story. We try to visit any of the homes of the fallen soldiers, if possible during the Shiva or at some point, and reach out to the family and share a bit in their loss and their grief with them. And I have a lot of stories about things that happened, but probably the most amazing or the most emotional was when I walked into the home of one of these families during the Shiva. And as soon as I walked in, the mother of the fallen soldier immediately stood up, and she saw that I was wearing a kippah. And she started to, very agitated and in a very emotional way, she started to yell out, "Your dat," in Hebrew, but I'll translate, "Your dati, I see your kippah, you're the one who can teach us the song." I had no idea what she was talking about. And I'm not sure that the other people there did either. And I said, "I don't know what you mean." And she said, the Shabbos song, the Shabbat song. I said, "Okay, I still don't know what you mean." And she said, "We are not a religious family. We're a Chiloni family. And that's the way we brought up our children. My son also was not Dati. But when he would often stay on the base for Shabbat, he would sit with the other boys around the Shabbat table on the base. And many of those boys were Dati. And they sang Smirot. They sang songs. And he learned the songs, and he would come home and he would sing those songs to us on those occasions when he was home for Shabbat. And there was one particular song that he loved and that we loved, and he used to sing it with us. But now it's been many weeks since we saw him, and he's no longer here, and we don't remember the song. But you must know the song, so we want you to sing it for us. Well, of course, I didn't know what song they were talking about. So I started to sing the songs of the Zemirot. I started to sing Yom Zeh Mechubad. They said, "No, that's not it." I started to sing Deror Yikra. "No, that's not it." Okay, I sang Lecha Dodi. "No, that's not it either." Finally, I began to sing the Zemer Yom Zeh Yisrael. Yom Zeh Yisrael, Ha'ora B'Simcha, Shabbat Menucha. And she screamed out, "That's the song." And she said, "Please sing it." So if you can imagine this scene at a Shiva, in the midst of all this grief and people crying, we are sitting there singing Yom Zeh Yisrael. And it's an appropriate song, of course, in fact, for such a situation, because it talks about giving comfort le'uma shevura, to a broken nation. It talks about, if you look at the words of Yom Zeh Yisrael, to those who are troubled, Shabbat will bring you peace, and was very appropriate. But the whole scene, this mixture, this bizarre combination of singing a Zemer of Shabbat in a very upbeat, uplifting way in a Shiva house, especially in that kind of a situation, was something that you couldn't make this kind of thing up. And it occurred to me afterwards that the title of that song is very appropriate. Yom Zeh Yisrael. This is the day for Israel. Literally, this day belongs to Israel, and I think it encompasses, in a sense, that for all the suffering that we have, and on the price that we have paid in the past, and sometimes unfortunately continue to pay, nevertheless, Yom Zeh Yisrael. This is the time of Israel. There's never been a time in Jewish history when we had an Israel like we have today. People will reminisce and be nostalgic, and they'll think back to the shtetl in Europe. That certainly doesn't in any way compare to the Israel of today. And even if they want to go all the way back to Shlomo HaMelech and the building of the Beit HaMikdash, we remember that that wasn't good for very long, because God very soon, as soon as Shlomo died, the kingdom was split, and Hashem very angrily indicated his unhappiness. So no one can say that there was ever a time in the history of Israel that was better than what we have today. We hope will get better than it is today, but it's never been better. And the song of Yom Zel Yisrael, it's very fitting, but it's also, I think, a metaphor for this bizarre scene that Jewish life is a mixture of the lowest lows and the highest highs. And we somehow manage to scrape through our difficult times. Hashem promises that we'll never disappear. We do suffer some of the punishments that Hazinu tells us, but in the end, we live on to sing that song. And that's why Hazinu perhaps is a fitting way basically to end the Chumash with a song that contains within it both the tragic and also the miraculous, the sad and the happy. And in a sense, that's Israel's life is a sukkah. It's tenuous, the walls shake. We sometimes have to move like a sukkah moved from place to place, and we have moved from country to country. But at the end of the day, when we come to Eretz Yisrael, that's permanent. That doesn't move. The other countries, well, they're not meant for us on an eternal level. But when we come to Eretz Yisrael, when we build our sukkah, this is where we are. And I sincerely believe this is where we shall stay. So I'm going to leave it with that and to wish everybody not only a Shabbat Shalom, but a Chag Sameach. This is by many accounts, the happiest of all the Jewish holidays. We have Simchat Yom Tov, but on Sukkot, we actually call the holiday Zaman Simchatenu, and we have a mitzvah, Vahita Ach Sameach, you should only be happy. And for the time, just forget about some of the negatives and some of the difficulties. And at the end of the day, appreciate all the wonderful things that Hashem has given us, even sitting in our little sukkah, that we don't need necessarily all the creature comforts to be happy, as long as we have our family and we have each other and we're here and are able to celebrate. We survived the Aser Timei Tshuva, and that's a good sign that Hashem hopefully will give us a year that, as we said before, Tehei Shnat Plaim Gedolim, let this be a year of great miracles. Tafshin Pei Gimel. So we're signing off. We can't stay on for questions today. See you in 2 weeks. Thank you all very much for being a part of it. And I hope you're enjoying the share as much as I do. So see you again in 2 weeks.